Hello guys, my name is Ryan Keane and today I will be doing a presentation on Roman and Gothic architecture. I will be explaining the differences between how they are built and the different time periods when they were built. Roman and Gothic architecture. There are many differences between the two types of architecture, but also between the both of them they had a few similarities within each other, but also with a lot of similarities comes a lot of differences. The time period of Roman and Gothic architecture. So the Roman and Gothic architecture were built in two completely different centuries. The Roman architecture was actually built between the 9th and the 12th century, but it was just going right into the beginning of the 12th century. Compared to the Gothic architecture, it began being built during the mid of the 12th century. The arches in the Roman architecture were rounded. Also, the Roman architecture had very small windows that don't have a lot of staining. The windows were very small, so inside of the buildings would be very dark compared to the Gothic architecture. The Roman architecture also had pillars inside of the building in order to support the building. Having the pillars inside of the building was a lot better support than having them outside the building, and it would create a lot more sturdiness inside the building, which therefore makes the Roman architecture buildings a lot more sturdy. Okay, so here's a few images of the Roman architecture. The picture all the way on the left, you can see how the Roman architecture would have, the Roman buildings would have like really small windows and would not allow a lot of light inside the building. So inside the Roman architecture, it would be very dark inside. The middle picture, it's showing how the Roman arches are rounded compared to the Gothics where they weren't. And then on the picture all the way on the right, that's showing how well built the buildings were and like how sturdy they were with the big poles. Gothic architecture. The Gothic arches were very different compared to the Romans because they were pointy instead of being rounded off. There were a lot of windows with the tinted glass. This way it was very bright inside of the buildings. As I said before, the Roman buildings were very dark, but the Gothic buildings have a lot of tinted light inside the building, so it's a lot easier to see when you're inside the building. The Gothic buildings had to have support bars outside in order to have the capability to hold the building up, because inside the building they didn't have the columns to re-support the building, so on the outside it looks slightly uglier. So they had to have all the supportings outside the buildings. And then right here's the two images of the Gothic architecture. On the left, that's just showing the support beams that would hold up the buildings. And then on the right, we have a picture of it just shows how much art they used to use back during these days. They used a lot of art to show like how they used to do things. And for instance, the Gothic was like a lot more lighter. Like when you walked in, they wanted it to be more like a heaven compared to the Romans, where the Roman building was a lot more sturdy and built to stay. Benefits of Roman architecture. These two buildings were built very differently and both had different advantages. The Roman buildings were a lot more sturdy compared to the Gothic buildings. The Roman buildings would have pillars inside of the buildings for extra support. They also did not have as many windows in order to keep them more intact. This keeps them a lot more sturdy. Now that these buildings does not have as many windows, it was a lot more dark inside of the buildings. Overall, the Romans were going for a build that was going to keep them safe and have the buildings stand for a long time and not have a lot of structural issues. Benefits of Gothic architecture. The Gothic architecture, I feel, was a lot more based on looks compared to the Roman architecture. Actually, I feel like they wanted it to be more of like a heaven when you walk into the Gothic architecture compared to just a very well built building. The Gothic architectures were very light inside of the buildings because there were a lot of windows that basically covered most of the building to let light in. With every advantage also comes disadvantages. Having so many windows inside of the building means the buildings are going to be a lot weaker because glass isn't going to be as strong as the other materials they could use to build the building. The Gothic buildings were pretty weak, so in order to keep them intact on the side of the buildings, they would have to put support bars so that the building would not collapse, which we saw a few pictures ago. We're excited. These are the two sites that I used to get the majority of my information compared to what, and I also used information that I learned previously within inside the unit. Thank you guys. Have a great day.